Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, Scotty and I are here to bring you the latest precon upgrade for one of the most sought after decks of the Commander Masters series. And this is going to be the Sliver Swarm. And yeah, we're excited to bring you this deck. It's the first time that we're doing a Sliver tribal deck, so that's going to be a fun one. And thank you very much, Scotty, for this wonderful intro as always. So for anyone who's new to this kind of series, what we usually do is we've already analyzed the deck in a previous video where we've seen all the cards that we'd like to keep, all the synergies, and we just reviewed the deck overall. And now we're going into a whole way to upgrade the deck. Now, unlike most guides out there, we don't give you a set list of cards and tell you that this is the deck with the 99 cards. We give you many options, many ideas on how to better enhance the precon deck and get it to its maximum potential. We do not look at budgets and we just go for it. And also because of that, we have a series of cards in a list and there might be a lot of overlap. There might be some choice that you have to do, and this is because every card collection is different. And depending on your resources and money, you might be able to have already some of these cards. So this is why we just give you a broad spectrum analysis, and it will be up to you to then select the ones that you believe will make the deck the best synergy and go for it. Also an addendum, if you're looking at the description down below, you'll be able to find a list of all the cards. And this is because we aren't able to put pricing of all the cards, as it takes quite a while because we give you plenty of options. And this way, if you click on the list, you'll be able to go to an architect public link where you can see all the cards, and then you can filter out and see the pricing for those specific cards and whatever region that you're from, and then go from there, and then you just have a quick and easy reference. So without further ado, let's look at the deck proper. Now, this analysis and upgrade will be as usual as we do it with the commander that is given inside of the deck. We don't give you any other commander, and the commander is the Sliver Gravemother, which is a Wooburg, meaning that it costs one of each of the 5 colors. Sliver, it's a 6/6 that gives Encore to all your slivers and allows for the legend rule not to be applied for slivers. So this is a very interesting commander. It's not the best sliver commander. I believe there are some out there that are much better, like the Overlord or the Legion or the first sliver or even the Sliver Queen. But what we will do is we'll look at the commander as is. We'll try and upgrade it from there. And of course, should you then have all the other cards, this is one of those decks where it's really interchangeable because it's all 5 colors. So should you prefer to play the Sliver Queen, for example, or the Sliver Legion, or the first sliver instead of this one, then it's your choice. But we will be upgrading it with the idea that the Grave Mother is going to be a commander. So we'll have a first look, and we usually have looks on the different card types depending on the main card types of the game. So we'll have a look at creatures first. And the way that we go through this is in no particular order, it's just the order that's in front of me in the folder. So we'll start off with the Dockside Extortionist. Now, when building and looking at this deck, I realized that there are some creatures out there that we could use that, even though they don't synergize with the sliver part of the deck, they still allow us to go for that Wooburg, because the mana base, depending on what lands you might have, is going to be the hardest thing to get down. So Dockside Extortionist is going to help us do just that, because when it comes into play, depending on how many artifacts all your opponents control, you get to create X treasure tokens, and that's a really good creature, because usually a lot of people play a lot of artifacts, and even if you get to create 6, 7, 8 treasure tokens, that's an insane amount for 2, and so that's a very good card. Next up, we have the Bloom Tender, which is an elf druid. And this is a really nice one as well, because it allows us to fix our mana. And because we have all 5 colors, this is going to allow us to get Wooburg much quicker. And the same thing, we have the Noble Hierarch, which is going to allow us to, well, first off, give Exalted to any one creature that attacks by itself, but then allows us to put any of the colors of green, white, and blue in play. And that's really good by tapping it. Next up, we have the Mirror Entity. And this is a good buffer for all slivers. It's Shapeshifter and Changeling, and it just buffs the base power and toughness to XX of any and all creature types that are on your side of the board. effectively making this of kind of like an alpha strike, if you would. Next up, we have Morphon the Boundless, and this is really good because first off, it's a shapeshifter, so it's of any type. It's a 6/6 for 7. Remainder of the video will just assume that every card that has a creature type will be Sliver, and then spells cost WUBRG less to cast, and this is amazing commander, and in general a great creature to have for WUBRG decks. So in this one, we really want to play it, and it gives all other creatures of the chosen type +1/+1, so it's also an anthem effect. Another one is Birds of Paradise, and this is a 0/1 that adds mana of any one color by tapping it. I understand that you're looking for maybe other slivers, and funny enough, the deck comes with a lot of the most basic and more powerful average slivers that you will see. We have a list of slivers that we will get to. As I said, this is in no particular order that we will get to be able to expand upon the slivers. But remember, the deck has a lot of slivers already, so it will be a really tricky situation where you have to cut quite a lot of those slivers that might be decent to be able to check which ones are the best ones to keep and which ones are the new ones that you want to introduce. So at the moment, we're trying to address the biggest problem, and that's mana generation. And this is why they're here. Again, as I said, I don't control the numbering on the list. Now we start looking at the first sliver on the list. This is the Ward Sliver. It gives protection to all the slivers from a specific color. This is a decent sliver. It's not the strongest of slivers, but it's good to have, and it might protect you from 1 or 2 opponents depending on what decks they might be playing. And it's always nice to be able to create some blockers that no matter what will not be able to be killed unless there's a complete board wipe. Then there's Toxin Sliver, which effectively gives Death Touch to any and all slivers, and this is a very good card. Making your sliver Death Touch able is extremely good because any and all sliver tokens, no matter how big they are, they become a threat that if your opponents are going to block or be blocked by your slivers, they're going to think about it twice before doing so. And of course, the deck comes already with some Death Touch slivers, and should you not want to add more of this, it's fine. Next up, we have Hunter Sliver. This is one of the weaker ones that I'd rather not use because it gives provoke to any and all slivers, and to be fair, I'd rather not have the defending players block all my slivers, and forcing them to block, it's only useful if you've grown your slivers a lot or if you've protected your slivers significantly. So that's something that you will need to be very careful if you want to bring this in the deck. Next up, another one that's not super great, but it's okay to have, is a 3/3 Magma Sliver. This allows you to basically give off tapping a sliver and giving +X/+0 to any specific sliver, where X is the number of slivers in play. This can grow a sliver significantly. It does not buff toughness, but if you have a flying sliver or a shrouded sliver or anything like that, being able to go to face and then just tap and maybe you have 10 slivers in play is going to make it really hard on your opponents. Next up, we have the Roost Slivers, and this one is more if you're playing against a board that has a lot of counters. This makes all sliver spells uncounterable, and this is quite nice against those board states. Otherwise, it's quite inefficient. So if you know that you're going to be playing against players who are not CDH focused or counter focused, this is a card that you don't necessarily need. Then you have another one that's not so great, but it's okay. It's a 2/2 Thorncaster Sliver. Whenever a sliver attacks, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. This is not necessarily a bad thing if you're going down the route of having a lot of tokens slivers. So this could be ramping up really quickly, but if you're not going that route, then it's something that you don't necessarily have to play. Then you get Predatory Sliver, which is one of the slivers that I mentioned in the guide of the review of what we were cutting, because there are slivers in the deck at the moment in the precon that give you a buff on the toughness, a buff on the strength but not on the toughness, and this is the one that buffs both, and it's a really good sliver, and I would definitely use it. Then Leechy Sliver is another base sliver. It's not the greatest of slivers. It's only here because, again, as I said, this deck does have a lot of great basic slivers, and the biggest chunk is already there. This is more depending on what you have in your deck or how you want to build your deck. We're just giving you an option of all the slivers that are available that are worth playing, and then you decide. So this one is just one that whenever a sliver is blocked, then the defending players loses a life. Again, if you're going down the route of the many tokens in a sliver deck, then this might be really good because you will have a lot of damage done in one turn on top of the normal damage. Then Dregscape Sliver is another one that's really good actually, because it gives an earth to all of your slivers. So if you don't have your commander in play, this is nice because it's another graveyard interaction. It does work just like your commander though, so in the end the sliver that's been unearthed has to be exiled, but it's not bad at all, so it's quite nice. And on top of that, if you count that the unearth ability only costs 2 generic for any sliver, and you can Wooburg in any sliver for 2 generic, it's insanely good. Then we start to see one of the bigger hitters, and this is where the real part of the upgrade happens. As I said, this deck has a lot of very good slivers, but it doesn't have all of the best ones. So this first sliver is first and foremost one of the best slivers in the game. This is a sliver that gives all sliver spells Cascade, and it has Cascade, and it's a 7/7 for 5 Wooburg. So this is a really great spell to have in your sliver deck, and it's a great creature overall. It's a kind of a must, unfortunately, for this kind of deck. It's on the more expensive side. There are more expensive slivers out there, which we'll get to, but it's definitely a great sliver because you'll have a lot of slivers that cost at least 5 or 6 or 4, and so cascading with slivers can become really big. And remember, anytime a sliver comes into play, all your slivers get that sliver ability. And this is the name of the game. We're trying to just buff our slivers so that it can have a lot of abilities. And this card really allows us to do so. Then another good one that's on the mana ramp side is the Noble Hierarch, which is the same as the Noble Hierarch. It's just the other colors that it doesn't use, so it's quite decent for ramping. Then we get the Sliver Overlord, a great one from the Scourge expansion. It's a 7/7 that costs Wooburg, and then you can search your library for any specific sliver and put it in your hand, and you can then gain control of a target sliver. It's highly unlikely that you'll be playing against a Sliver Mirror, but if you are, you can use the second ability. Otherwise, the first ability, it's insanely good. And as I said, whether you decide to keep the Gravemother as your main commander, or you decide to swap one of the first Sliver, Overlord, Queen, or Legion, it's your choice. But anyway, this is a must for any sliver deck, and it's a really good card. Next up, we get Horn Sliver, and this gives trample to all of our slivers. It's not an expensive sliver to get, and it's a 2/2 for 3. An extremely good sliver and an absolute must for our deck. Giving trample to all the slivers, especially once they're buffed, makes them very hard to deal with and really annoying. So that's quite wonderful. And on top of that, you can always bring any sliver that might be blocked by multiples back for 1 turn with your commander. So that's quite good. So absolutely a must to have in the deck. Then we get, I think, the most expensive sliver of them all from Stronghold. This is the Sliver Queen. It's a 7/7 for Wooburg. And of course, it's a sliver as well. And then you can put a sliver token in play. That's a 1/1 colorless sliver for just 2 generic. And this is where, if you're going the route of the token generation, this is where it counts. We're not taking the deck necessarily in that direction. We're not choosing the enchantments in that direction. But if you are taking the deck in that direction, then the Sliver Queen is the must as your commander. So in general, it's amazing to have in any sliver deck. Then we get the Heart Sliver, another one of the slivers that gives haste to all of your slivers. Again, it's one of those classic ones, and it's really good to have. You already have a couple in the deck, not necessarily needed to have this one, but this one is one of the cheaper ones. So should you want to swap one of the more expensive ones for this one, that's a great one to have. Alternatively, you can just have more hasty slivers. Now, another great one that I advise you to swap in for the other ones that we discussed is the Muscle Sliver. Muscle Sliver gives +1/+1 to any and all of your slivers, and just like the one previously, this is an absolute must to buff all your creatures up. Then we get the Ensign Sliver, and this gives lifelink to all of your sliver. Again, this is an amazing card. We already have one lifelinker in the deck. I would keep that one in, and I would add this one too. Then we get Shadow Sliver, and this is an absolute amazing sliver. It just gives shadow to any and all creatures that are slivers, and it makes all your board unblockable. And nowadays there are not a lot of decks that run shadow cards, so this is insanely good. It makes your deck a killer deck. Once it's in play, all your slivers just become unblockable. Then we get the Basalt Sliver, which is a nice one because it allows you to sack any sliver and add 2 black to your mana pool, and this allows you to ramp. Of course, it doesn't allow you to necessarily ramp into Wooburg, but not all slivers are Wooburg, and this is quite nice. And it's nice to sacrifice those little tokens that you might have generated with other slivers or slivers that you have doubles of, and then just be able to ramp into something bigger. And then we have the Opaline Sliver, which is great because whenever a sliver becomes the target of a spell, then you can draw a card, and this is one of your draw engines. It's quite a decent one and absolutely a must for your deck, especially if you're growing on the side of a lot more slivers than enchantments. And then a really important one is the Pulmonic Sliver. This is a 3/3 that not only gives all your slivers flying, but it also allows you to put a permanent sliver instead of a graveyard on top of your deck. Of course, this nullifies our main commander, but it also allows you to just keep in play constantly those slivers that you really want to keep. The ones that have already died, you can just refund with your commander for 1 turn. And another decent one that I think will be nice is the Sidewinder Sliver. It's very cheap because it's a 1/1 for 1, and it just gives flanking to all your slivers, making it a really good card, especially early game when your slivers are not as strong and your opponents might be having a bit of a larger presence on a board with power and toughness. This -1/-1, any creature that's blocking a sliver that doesn't have flanking, and there aren't a lot of flanking creatures anymore. Then another insanely important one is the Fury Sliver. This gives double strike to all of your slivers. It's a bit on the expensive side to play and cast, but it's really a good sliver, and it's an absolute must. Then the Homing Sliver is another great one. It allows you basically to transform any sliver that you would cycle away with Sliver Cycling when 3 generic into a tutor for slivers, and this is really wonderful because then you're just cycling to get the ones that you need necessarily, like the ones that are in early game would mana ramp you or mana fix you, and then in later game the Wooburg ones, and you're just trading in the smaller ones for these, and it becomes really good. Next one is the Sedge Sliver, and this is nice mainly for the second ability, but it's okay also for the first ability. So you get a +1/+1 so long as you control a swamp on any sliver, so that's okay. You buff a sliver for 1, and then on the second part you also get regenerate ability for all slivers, and this is a 2/1 and is a definitely must play for your deck. Any sliver that gives you more than 1 ability on your slivers is a must. Then we get the Virulent Sliver, which is a great one because it gives -1 to any and all slivers, and poison counters are really annoying in Commander because no matter what their life total is, or if you've attacked with your commander or not, once they reach 10 poison counters, your opponents lose the game, and that's just wonderful. And when you create a board that is full of poisonous slivers, then that's just going to win you the game real quick. Next up, you get the Darker Sliver. This is not a necessity in a sliver deck. It's more of if you're going down the road again of a lot of token generation, then you should use this because you sacrifice a sliver to gain 3 life. And this is not a necessity if you're not going that way, because most of the slivers that are going to go into play, you will not want to sacrifice. Therefore, even though you can unearth it, anchor it, what you want to do is keep them in play as much as you can. So necessarily this is not bad with our current commander, but it's something that should you decide not to put this in, it's fine. Then we get another one of the really good ones. This is the Sliver Legion. It's a 7/7 for Wooburg, and it gives us any sliver +1/+1 for as many slivers on the battlefield. So each sliver buffs each other up, and that's an insane buff, especially once you start having a lot of slivers in play. Next up, let's go and see the artifact slot. As I said, the creature slot is really populated by slivers. You already have a lot of slivers, and the most important part is that most of the best ones are already part of the deck. The bigger ones and the best ones are going to be the more expensive ones and some of the ones that we've said before. So it's going to be up to you what you decide to cut, what you decide to keep, and how many slivers are going to be taken away from the chunks from the other types of cards that you can play in here. And the trick will be finding the balance between them, because you will need ramp, you will need mana fixing, you will need enchantments and spells to protect your slivers. So one of the first things that I will do is I will go into the artifacts, and the artifacts here, we usually don't necessarily advise people to have specific artifacts that are really expensive, such as Moxin and the mana vaults and so on and so forth. But there are some decks in which it's kind of a really big necessity, and if you don't have them, it tends to become really a hindrance to you. And Woober decks are one of those that really necessitate them, so this deck will need them. And the first one that we're going to look at is the Chrome Mox. You get to imprint any specific card, and then you can tap the Mox for any specific mana color, all of that card's identity. And of course, you don't want to do this with any of your Wooberg slivers unless it's your commander that you put in hand and then you exile it and then you cast it again with an increased tax. But realistically, the Chrome Mox is a great little early game buffer that allows you to just get mana in real quick and really good. It's one less extra turn that you need to be able to get those bigger slivers in play. Then one that interacts with the ability of our commanders, which is the Anchor, is the Convergence of Dominion. This is an interesting card. You usually see this in Reanimator decks and decks that have abilities that play from the graveyard, and this is exactly what our deck with the current commander does. And this makes any activated abilities from the graveyard cost 2 generic less to cast. And of course, it can't reduce the mana ability to less than 1, so at least you will always cast 1. And then you can tap 3 and tap it to mill 3 cards on top of your deck. So I would use it more for the first ability and allowing you to get a quicker play on the Anchor. Similar to that, we have the Embalmer's Tools. This is a 2 generic artifact. It costs 1 less generic to activate, and that's basically the only reason why we're doing this. Again, if you're not going with the usual commander, then I wouldn't advise you to use these two, but because the main commander plays from the graveyard, this is a good interaction to keep in mind. And then we start looking at some of the tribal artifacts. There are already a very good base of tribal artifacts in the deck proper, and the ones that are missing, one of them is a Door of Destinies. Every time you put a sliver in play, you put a counter on it, and then you put a +1/+1 on each sliver for each counter on the Door of Destiny. This can make the slivers grow insanely big, especially because you have tokens generation for the slivers, and so that can be a really great card. Next, we have the Maskwood Nexus, which is a great one because it gets the sliver type to any and all creatures, and including some the ones that we saw that for example are not slivers and are there for mana generation. And on top of that, for 3 generic, you can tap it and you create basically a sliver. That's a 2/2. Really wonderful and really great to continue that synergy on your side. Then another great one is Urza's Incubator, and it's kind of a must. You have to have your slivers cost 2 less generic. Of course, this won't affect the Woober slivers, but for every other sliver, costing 2 less generic is insanely good. Then another great one that I was really surprised I didn't see in the deck is the Chromatic Lantern. This allows all your lands to tap for any mana, and they can tap for any mana as well as an artifact, and it's a really important card in your deck because you need Wooberg. Another good one that I was extremely surprised to see that it wasn't in the deck was the Commander Sphere, and this is a classic. You really need the Commander Sphere in anything that can give you any color that's not too expensive on your deck, and this is one of them. Then, because in our analysis we saw there are spells and also the Titan of Lidjar that can allow us to get an insane amount of advantage of cards in hand depending on how many of the tribals we have in play, we need to start looking at ways to keep them in hand if we can play all of them, and Thought Vessel is one of them. You have no maximum hand size, and it's also a mana rock, so it's always good. Then another great one is a Timeless Lotus. It comes into play tapped, it only costs 5, and you can tap it to add Wooberg, and this will basically give you a free cast for any of the big spells that you really need. Then the Chromatic Ori, another great one that's on the expensive side. It's 7 generic to cast, but it allows you to ramp colorless, and then you can play mana of any color for any spells. And then for 5 generic and tap, you can basically draw 5 cards, which is amazing. Up to 5 cards, which is amazing. And then next up, we have the Lotus Petal. This is a simple one, but it allows you to get those WUBR creatures out. This is where I would use it. I wouldn't necessarily use it on the other ones. I would make sure that if I have a WUBR, so for our commander, for example, or any of the other better ones, I would definitely keep this for that in play, but it's absolutely a necessity. Just like the Monk's Diamond, unfortunately, it's really good to be able to in one turn cast a land and cast also the Monk's Diamond, effectively making you play a turn ahead, and this is really good. And that's it for our artifacts. Now I will look at battles, and I will say that I was really interested in seeing how I could use battles in this deck. You need to be careful, as I said, any slot that you're putting more stuff in, you're taking away from your main sliver, and slivers really want the abilities to be more on the slivers than on the other permanents in play. But there are some battles that I thought might be really interesting. The first one is one of my favorite ones, and that's the Invasion of Gobakhan. And this is a great one. It's really simple to just kill up, and you can choose a specific opponent, you look at their hand, you make something cost 2 generic more, but the flip side is insanely good. You get to have an anthem and a way to also protect your slivers, making them hexproof and indestructible for 1 turn. And this is one thing that tribal decks really need to have, is protection for your tribal, because you work so hard, especially for slivers, because any one sliver that you loses the ability for all your slivers if you don't have redundancy, and this is an extremely good one, and this is why I would play it. Another interesting one that's really great for us, I've thought about the Invasion of Ikoria. It is hard to kill, it's 6 defense, but it allows you to either reanimate or search your library for anything of X, and that's really good because you don't need WUBR to be able to put in a 7/7 of the best ones, and that's really great. And then it flips around, and for each non-human creature, which is all of our slivers, then it allows us to be able to do damage as if they were never blocked, and that's just insane. It's gonna be hard to initially kill it, but if you're playing this in the later game and you have a lot of slivers in play that can shroud themselves, that make them unblockable, and so on and so forth, which is something that I will tutor for ASAP once I have my plan in play, then definitely this is one to play. Then another great one is the Invasion of Chandalar. If you've milled yourself, or if you have some slivers that you don't really want to encore because anchoring them would be more of a detriment and you just want them back, this allows you to bring them back. You have up to 3 permanents from your graveyard that is really good. You put them back into your hand, and then it flips around, and then you can put a permanent at every beginning of your upkeep from and onto battlefield, and this allows you to bypass the need for Warburg. Then a decent one that I think the flip side is better than the front side is the WUBR Invasion of Alara. The Invasion of Alara itself is not bad. It allows you to go through your deck. Initially you look for 2 cards that are 4 mana or less. One you put into play without paying the cost, the other one you keep in hand, so at least you're not losing any of the important slivers, hopefully. And any ones that enter in the graveyard, we have ways of getting them back, whether it's Encore, Unearth, or reanimate effects that we saw before, or put back into hand. And then when it flips around, it is an insanely good spell because it's a sorcery that gives yourself the ability to draw 2 cards, you put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield, and then you can create a copy of a permanent you control, distribute 3+1/+1 counters amongst 2 or 3 or 1 creature, and then destroy target permanent you control. Basically, it does everything that you want. And of course, as I said, be careful and mindful of the slots that you're removing from the main tribal to allow you to use this. And yeah, I advise you to use this intelligently. The first 2 battles, I believe, are the best ones. Then we're going to have a look at the enchantments, and we're going to try and see at the enchantments level what is missing from the main precon, and this is the abilities to either ramp yourself, draw more cards, or protect. And yeah, this is going to be the bread and butter, and just like before, this is a slot that is really up to you what you want to add and what you want to remove. So Mana Echoes is one of the good ones because it allows you to ramp. So you add an amount of generic mana equal to the number of creatures that share a type with the sliver. So this is really nice. It can allow you to ramp into other slivers. Of course, this is not the strongest one. There are better ones ahead. Then we have the Descendants path, which is really great for tribal. At the beginning of your upkeep, you reveal the top card of your library. As well, if it's a sliver, you may cast a card without paying the mana cost itself, which is insanely good. You have a sliver in play, and then you can just freely cast, I don't know, a Legion without paying Wooburg. This is a great card. And you don't really get to lose those cards either, because you get to put them back into the bottom of your library. It's a shame that you don't put them in the graveyard as well, but it's not bad. Then another great one is the Silver Library. It allows you to get through the deck really quickly and choose those cards that you need. And it's a wonderful card that is really a necessity for your deck, especially before in the beginning of the game you're gonna be searching for those mana fixing, mana ramping, and then towards the middle of the game you're gonna start building that army of slivers and effects, and then by the end of the game you want to go for the ultimates, and that's just how I would do it, and Silver Library just gets us there. Then one of the great effects that's kind of the go wide and go home is the Legion of Loyalty. It's an enchantment, it gives mirror to all of your slivers. This is insane. It allows you to just attack one opponent and you attack all opponents all at once. And of course, by the time this is turn 8, you hopefully have very good army built up, and it's gonna be super impactful to be able to do this. Then another great one is Kindred Discovery, a wonderful one for tribals that allow you to play blue, and it allows you to basically draw a card anytime that you would play a sliver, and this is really self-explanatory. It's a great card. Then another amazing enchantment is the Black Market Connections. This allows you to create treasure token, draw cards, or create a shapeshifter which can then become a sliver. This is a wonderful card for any tribal deck, but overall it's just a great card in general, and it's starting to go up in price more and more, so it's definitely a must in this deck. Then the Reflections of the Lit Jar is really good. It allows you to copy the slivers that are non-legendary, so this is wonderful. Any of the smaller ones, there are some effects that can overlap, and that's what you want to be casting it on. Then another great one that's slowly starting to ramp up in price, that's been recently reprinted, is the Smothering Tide. This is a wonderful card that I can't stress enough how important it is in your deck, because once you get it into play, you're going to be Wooburg Central much easier than you would before. And then in the draw aspect, you don't necessarily need too much. You already have quite a few draw engines, but there are a couple of enchantments that, should you have them and you don't have maybe any of the other great enchantments, you can play these ones. First off is the Mystic Grimoire. This is a classic. It has cumulative upkeep, so you won't be able to keep it up for long, but for as long as you do, you get to draw a card whenever a player plays a spell, unless they pay 4 generic. So realistically, for a couple of turns, you're going to be able to get quite a bit of cards before you have to sacrifice it. Then you have Ristic Study, which is similar, although it doesn't have the cumulative upkeep, and it's going to be reprinted soon in the Wilds of Eldraine and the bonus sheet, and this is going to be a great one. It allows you to draw a card unless they pay 1 generic. Really wonderful card. Another great one that I would try and play is the Elven Chorus. It allows you to look at your top of your library at any time, and you may cast creature spells from the top of your library, and then also gives you creatures you control to tap to add 1 mana of any color. This is an insane card that was recently added in the Lord of the Rings expansion, and honestly, for a Wooburg tribal like this one, absolute must. Another great one is the Tribute to the World Tree, and it's really great, even though it's going to be a bit harder to cast because it is 3 green. But for any sliver that's 3 or greater, you get to draw a card. Otherwise, you get to put 2+1/+1 counters on it, making all the small slivers great. And this is just wonderful. You get to draw or make your slivers bigger, and that's just a great one. Rhythm of the Wild can be a card that you might want to use. Creatures you control can't be countered, so this is really nice. And then it gives Raya to any and all of your creatures, which means that whenever they come into play, you either give them another +1/+1 counter or haste. So again, You don't have to play all of these enchantments. You choose which one you already have or which ones would better fit the way that you're building the deck. Cryptolith Rite is a good enchantment. It allows all your creatures to have tap to add 1 mana of any color, and this is a necessity in this kind of deck. And then we get the Underworld Breach, and this kind of nullifies what our commander does, but at the same time it's a great enchantment to have, because should you have any slivers that you do not want to anchor, then this one allows you to escape those slivers in. And yeah, it's just a great one. It can be very expensive though for those slivers that are more expensive. Then if you don't have all the other really good mana ramping enchantments, a good one is the Carpet of Flowers. You might have this, you might not, but this is a good one. It's not a necessity though, because it only works if an opponent has islands. So for any islands, you get to add that an opponent controls, you get to add X. And realistically, this is more on the low end side, and it's a fairly expensive card. But still, if you have these and you don't have the other ones, it might be worth having. And that's it for our enchantment slot. Now we'll start having a look at our instance. And as I said in the initial overview and review of the deck, the instance, the way that I would use it in a tribal is to protect my creatures and or to remove any specific targets that are necessary to be removed, and or to tutor in the cards that are key pieces from our army. So in keeping in theme with that, the first one that we get is Teferi's Protection. Look out for an entire turn of the table, all your cards, protecting all your slivers is super important. Another good one, and again, if you don't want to go down the route of CDH, you don't have to play these, but counters are extremely good at keeping your board status, because you can counter wipes. I wouldn't necessarily use them to, in this kind of tribal deck, control the board, but it's more to prevent any board wipes or anything that can affect your board in a large scale, or anything that you worked really hard on creating, for example, like one of your Wooburgs. So Force of Negation is one of these. You have a blue card, it's basically a Force of Will, and you can counter target non-creature spell. That's an amazing card. Keeping in theme with the previous one, Mana Drain. Really great counter. It allows you to ramp into your next spell. Again, it's colorless mana, but it's really wonderful. Again, if you don't want to use counters, you do not have to. You should, though, think of these as more preventing your opponents from wiping the board when threatening your status, and it's when it's not beneficial to you. Otherwise, you use the other spells. Then we started looking at some spell removal. Anguish Unmaking removes a permanent. It's really wonderful, and this is the kind of cards that you should be having rather than very specific ones. Removing permanents, you won't be removing land permanents, so you don't really care about it. So this one is a great card. Just like it's Assassin's Trophy, yes, your opponent gets to put land into play, but in the end, it's worth it. Then again, another great counter spell is Force of Will. Don't want to play it, it's fine. And then another wonderful protection spell is And They Shall Know No Fear. Wonderful for one turn, get indestructible and +1/+0 to any and all creatures, whether it's from a specific board wipe that destructs everything or because your opponent plays some tricky spells when you're attacking or blocking. This is a great spell. Then another amazing one for tribals is Kindred Summons. You get to look at the top X cards of your library depending on how many slivers you have, and then you can put into play directly any and all slivers that are in those cards, and you put the rest of the cards revealed at the bottom of the library. This is one of those kind of towards the end of the game, because it's a very expensive to play spell and you have slivers to play before that, but absolutely a great card. And then another one that is really important, and I get it, if you don't want to play tutors, it's fine. CDH is a different kind of thing, but there are some tutors in specific decks that are really important, and Worldly Tutor is one of them. You need to get those specific slivers that affect your current status on the board, and Worldly Tutor allows you to do just that. Then you get the Generous Gift, a great one to destroy any permanent. Another great protection spell is Cyclonic Rift, and it's just great to overload, and it protects you, and at the same time it allows you to just get a huge advantage on the board. Another great counter is Fierce Gunnership, which costs nothing if your commanders in play. Another good one is Deflecting SWAT, allows you to protect any and all commanders and all creatures that you want to keep in play. And another great protection one is also Heroic Intervention. For that turn, permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. Amazing little card, and I really advise you to play it. Then we get to Vampiric Tutor. As I said, you don't want to play tutors, that's fine, but this, if you want to, allows you to then go through your deck, get the one card that you need for your board status, and just put it on top, and it's a great card. As other spot removals, Beast Within is just like Generous Gift. Wonderful little card to have if you don't have some of the better ones, or if you don't have a lot of instants that can help you keep the bar status. This is a good card to have. And then Enlightened Tutor is another good one because it allows you to go for that enchantment that you might need. And for this one, depending on where you are in the game, at the beginning it might be the ones that give all your creatures the ability to tap for any mana, but towards the end of the game, some of the alpha striking ones, or for an artifact. And Enlightened Tutor is really good if you play tutors. Aldamri's Call, another great tutor for specific creatures. Wonderful card to have here. And D-Spark is another great little removal that's targeted to any specific permanent. Wonderful. Clever Concealment, another great wonderful protection spell, and because you'll have a lot of cards in play that are creatures, you can convoke it and make it cost a lot less. Definitely something that I really want to use every time I play a tribal. And that wraps it up for our instance. Let's have a look at sorceries. Now with the sorceries, we have a couple that not necessarily we need to play a lot, because as I said, we don't want to be wiping the board too much. We want to use the instance that we discussed before to be able to maintain a board status. But should you want to play some of these cards, you can go ahead and do it. First one is the Wheel of Fortune. If you're getting towards the end of your hand, this allows you to refresh your hand. Granted, it also allows for your opponents to do that. It is not a necessary card, and usually I don't advise giving advantages to your opponents, but in a Sliver deck, once you get to a certain point, having cards and being able to put them into play quicker than your opponents is going to be a huge turning point, and this is why maybe in this kind of deck it might be useful. Another great one is the Imperial Seal, but as I said, if you don't want to play tutors, forgo it. Just like the Demonic Tutor. Then you get Kindred Dominance. This is the one removal that I would keep, mainly because you destroy all creatures that are in Sliver. It is very expensive to cast, but if you're getting to a point where you can cast it, absolutely one that I would keep. Then another great one is Raise the Palisade. Again, you choose Slivers, and all creatures that are not Slivers get returned to their owner's hands, so absolutely a must in your deck. Then Patriarch's Blessing is another great one, interacts with Slivers in the graveyard and returns all Slivers from the graveyard. Absolutely wonderful. And lastly, for our guide, we will look at the lands. Now, granted, for lands, as we said in our previous guide, what you want to do is have all the triumphs, all the possible dual lands, and I mean the proper dual lands that come into play untapped, or that you can shock into play, and then fetches to go get them. But should you not be able to do that, then I advise you to play with whatever land base you're given or you have. Just remember that you're gimping yourself a lot, and if you're playing Wolberg, you really need to have some of the better lands. And I'm not necessarily saying that you need the original dual lands, but if you don't have the shock dual lands and some ways to fetch them, or the current triumphs that start in Zendikar Rising and New Capenna, then you're going to be gimping yourself a lot, so it's a necessity. So with that out of the way, let's look at the utility lands, because usually in our guides we just tell you the utility lands and we leave the rest of the land base up to you. The first one is the Cavern of Souls. Fairly self-explanatory. It's just to make the ability for you to cast any of the Slivers without worrying about either counters or the ability to pay mana for it. Then another great one is the Mutavault. This is a wonderful little one because it becomes any type and you can transform it. You can attack with it, and then on the end of the turn it just returns to be a land. But for the turn that you attack with it, it's a great card because it gets all the buffs from all the other Slivers. Then another great one is the Reliquary Tower. As I said, there are quite a lot of enchantments, a lot of creatures that end sorceries and instants that allow you to draw. If you're playing those, and especially the ones that give you an insane amount of draw, then the Reliquary Tower is definitely one of them that you need to be using. And on top of that, as usual, you get to tap one generic, which is not bad. Another really important one is the Cascading Cataracts. Because you're playing Wolberg, the ability to filter through 5 mana of any color into any color combination mana. It's really good. Maybe you don't have the full Wooburg, but you have this. It allows you to then play Wooburg. Then another great one that unfortunately was not reprinted in this deck, which everybody knows should have been reprinted, is the Sliver Hive. This is an insane card that now unfortunately has gone up in price because of the current reprint. It used to be a £5 card. Now it's, I think, around 20 something or 30 something or even more. So the Sliver Hive is great because you can put any mana of any colors. It's like a cavern of souls for slivers, and even though it doesn't have the uncounterable part, and then you can just put constantly tokens of slivers or tap to one generic for it. So it's really wonderful and an unfortunate necessity for this deck. Then we get the Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. This is great, just like the Yamotumb. We use them to give extra land type abilities to the other lands, because if you give all your lands, let's say you have some plains and some swamps, the ability to be forest, they can either or, so you can either tap for what a forest would give or a swamp would give, so on and so forth. So this is why we use that, just like the Tomb of Yavimot. And that wraps it up for our precon deck upgrade. I hope you've enjoyed this. Unfortunately, this is one of those decks that's not going to be a cheap one, especially if you want to go full in. The slivers are fairly expensive, and Wooburg is not a cheap color combination to be able to do easily. But if you don't care about that, and if you just want the best cards, you've seen the best cards for this deck in this channel in this video. So I hope this has been helpful for you. And that wraps it up for us for the video today. Honestly, I hope you've enjoyed it. We will not be doing any of the other Commander Masters decks for the Tech Deck Upgrade series unless you guys request them. So if there's a huge request for the Planeswalkers party or for the Enduring Enchantments, then we will be able to do those. Otherwise, we will be preparing to do all of the Wilds of Eldraine videos, which you've started seeing on our channel already, and we will be able to unbox for now all sealed products for the Wilds of Eldraine and review them. And as usual, for any Commander decks, we will be doing the same here, where we will be reviewing them and also upgrading them. So that's it from Scotty and I hope you've enjoyed this. And if you did, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It does help small channel like ours a lot. And also let us know in the comments below if there's anything that we missed or if there's anything that we could have added. Did you think about something else that we didn't think about? Make sure to let us know in the comments down below. I read and reply to every one of them. And until the next one, we wish you a lovely day, a blessed day. Be good, be kind, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!